that I should play Mario World. So I'm sure you're on the payroll for Nintendo or whoever else makes that. But are you on their payroll? I suppose one other thing before we wrap up is you told me at the conference that we were at that I should play Mario World. So I'm sure you're on the payroll for Nintendo or whoever else makes that. But are you on their payroll?
Well, the Nintendo consoles are definitely my favorite consoles, but I've certainly sent them a lot more of my money than they've ever sent me any money, which is precisely $0 that I have ever received from any company like that. Um, this idea fits into the demand model, and it's funny because there's this paper that we published a couple of years ago, Josh and I. Andy Galpin, who is a mutual friend of ours, he made a post about this paper, and then Joe Rogan picked it up, and it was all about the importance of stimulating the brain. And Rogan used it, and he was like, "This is why I play video games, because it stimulates my brain." And then I got loads of questions about video games stimulating the brain, and
Mhm.
there is actually some fairly good evidence that increasing complexity of video games. So you randomize people to different levels of video games. So it might be like Solitaire versus Tetris versus Super Mario World, and dare I
Yeah.
say it again, just because that's what people have used in studies. And as complexity increases, you see increasing improvements in things like executive function on standardized tests, like go no go tests, and working memory in particular. And then the reason is that in these sort of 3D worlds where you're first person and you are interacting with the world. It's not a real world, but it is this process of solving puzzles, interacting, exploring. Like all of these things are how we develop cognitive functions, right? If you think about a, a the baby developing its initial brain, that's how it stimulates the brain by interacting with the world. And so you are doing some version of this in video games. It's not the same, and maybe the level of challenge isn't as great as if we were doing this in real life,
Mhm.
but there do seem to be some benefits there, particularly if this is a novel stimulus for you, right? If you never played video games before, then this is a novel stimulus that can definitely drive improvements in cognitive function. But it doesn't have to be in the Super Mario world, but it does seem there are some meta-analyses that have looked at this, and they suggest that sort of first-person games where you're exploring a quote-unquote 3D world, those seem to be the ones that are maybe associated with greater benefits in terms of cognitive function. Um, then the other side being that there's you have too much of a good thing, so don't be playing so much Skyrim that you don't sleep, eat,
Oh,
like go out for go out into the world and lift some weights occasionally, all that kind of good stuff that we know is
no.
important as well.
I was specifically going to ask about Skyrim, Fallout, and RuneScape, kind of the classic games there. But no, it's good to know. It sounds like even other games that aren't totally exploring the world games would could potentially be helpful as well,
Yeah.
as long as there's an open three-dimensional environment. But yeah, I also like what you say about learning new skills in general. It does not have to be being skilled at playing a video game. I've picked up jump rope since you
Oh, cool.
recommend
Yeah.
learning something
Uh-huh.
that you're particularly bad at. So I've become
Yeah.
much better at that. And then just kind of like moving on. But I guess for a takeaway, how often, every 3 months, should you try to pick up a new skill? And then is there a certain age and or a certain cognitive function? For example, if you've noticed any memory loss whatsoever, regardless of age, is there a certain age when playing these open world video games is helpful? Or should you start when you're 18 and just play an hour a day?
So there's two parts to this. One is so if you think about cognitive function across your lifespan, in general, it increases until you get into your 20s and 30s. And it is different based on different cognitive domains, but just like talking on average, it tends to increase into your 20s and 30s and then tends to decline, except for things like crystallized intelligence or wisdom. They actually continue to improve into your 40s, 50s, and 60s. You get better at seeing connections between things than you are when you're younger.
Mhm.
So you can increase you can increase the peak. Like, what's the maximum amount of cognitive function that you're capable of? That's where early life environment and education are really critical, because that's what seems to be really driving that, right? How much we stimulating this brain as it's developing kind of determines the peak or possible peak. And then how much are you stimulating it by developing new skills later in life? Then that changes the trajectory of decline. Or, if you in a specific function later in life, you can still increase function significantly, and that's been shown in several studies if you start to stimulate it. So you kind of think about two different parts, but ideally, the earlier you start and the longer you do it for, the better. But it's never too late. Is kind of the important takeaway there. And so the skills that probably have the greatest benefit are those that are more whole brain, but also require some level of social interaction, and they're also the ones that are kind of baked into the history of humanity. So they are languages, musical instruments, movement, in particular dancing, seems to be, it's been shown in several studies to be better than other types of physical activity that are as difficult physically, but because you have this complex coordinated motor component, because you have music, because you have social interaction, all of those things seem to provide additional benefit in terms of cognitive function. So those kinds of skills are particularly good, it seems. But video games, other things play a role as well, absolutely. And the greatest drive for neuroplasticity happens early on in the learning process. So like you said, like when you're bad at it, and that process of failing and making errors is actually what drives a lot of learning and neuroplasticity. So it doesn't really matter how often you do it. It's just that, say pick up a skill that you want to learn. Say you go to a dance class. I think the optimal timing of when you learn things is probably like every 2 or 3 days. That's where you get like the most bang for your buck in terms of learning speed and the amount you get from each session. And that's probably what most people have time for, right? To do something 2 or 3 times a week. But then as long as you're getting better over time, that's great. But at some point you'll see diminishing returns, right? You'll be so good that getting better is actually really difficult. And then you might think, well, maybe it's time for me to pick up another skill, and then maybe you go and learn a language or something like that. So I'm less concerned about how frequently you pick up a new skill. It's just that, am I doing something that I'm bad at, that I'm making mistakes at, that's driving some